Midweek Mailbag Podcast. It's a dual hybrid podcast on your Pride of Detroit podcast network. My name is Jeremy Reisman. I am the producer slash beat writer for the Detroit Lions for prideofdetroit.com. You can find me at Detroit Online on Twitter. With me for this emergency podcast, I brought two people along with me. First, let's go to senior editor of Pride of Detroit, co-host of the PODcast and First Bite at Ryan_POD on Twitter. Ryan Matthews is here. Ryan, how are we doing on this Tuesday evening?
I'm surprised, right? Like we talked about this a little bit. We threw it out there as something that might happen, and then it just happened at noon. It just came out of nowhere, seemingly.
Yes, and of course we are referring to the Jeff Okudah trade, which we will devote the first half of this podcast to, and then we will answer some mailbag questions after that. But before we get into any of that, let's bring in the third member of our emergency podcast. He is the machine. He is Dane Brugler light. No, that's mean. No.
No, that's a compliment.
Okay, that's a compliment.
All right. It's probably more than I deserve. Thank you.
How are we doing, Eric?
All right. I'm excited for our Spotify Live, but it's not Saturday. Trying to extend those in any way we can.
Yeah, we are live and in person, a rare Eric, Ryan, and Jeremy live video podcast. So, of course, always here on twitch.tv/Pride of Detroit. But let's get to it. Jeff Okudah traded to the Atlanta Falcons today for a 5th-round pick. Technically not on the books yet, but the deal is done. Just kind of working through the paperwork at this point. I wrote a whole bunch on this, so I am going to save my breath here, and I want to just go immediate reactions from you guys. And let's start with you, Ryan.
Yeah, we kind of kicked this idea around, was it last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, where just in Slack we were talking about trade candidates for the Detroit Lions. And talked a little bit about DeAndre Swift, talked a little bit about Jeff Okudah, and it's always a mystery to kind of understand what the value is for an NFL player at any given moment. It seems like for the most part, like in other sports leagues, you can get an understanding of precedent being set here or there and establishing a baseline or a value. With football, there's just so many variables, right? And especially when it comes to, valuing a player versus a draft pick in terms of what, a draft pick has in value. I think we kind of came around to the idea that if Jeff Okudah got moved, it would be for a day 3 pick. Yeah. I think that we all kind of, chatted about it a little bit and looked at, some other trades that were made that maybe could have been a precedent that was set for a former 1st-round pick getting moved, especially like a quarterback, right? But yeah, a 5th-round pick seems like fair value. And truth be told, I think that this is a great trade for both teams. I think it's a fresh start for Jeff Okudah. He gets to go play in Atlanta, and he has plenty to prove, so he's going to be highly motivated. And, the Lions recoup something for a player who probably wasn't going to see a lot of the field. It was going to be, situational, and he was going to have to, find a way onto the field in sub packages and things like that. So I think it's a great deal for both sides.
Yeah, and I don't think it necessarily comes as much of a surprise, right? Like we were talking about it for a reason. Like I'm not going to say the writing was necessarily on the wall, but I think even when the quote unquote rumors came in at the front of the week, it was like, okay, I don't know if these are true rumors, but it certainly could happen, right? Like we all saw the situation that Jeff Okudah was in. So let me throw it to you, Eric. What was your kind of initial reaction, and how are you feeling maybe a few hours now removed from the news?
Well, I think our initial reaction's always going to be that they didn't get enough. I think that's the classic, gut feeling that you get initially. And I think when you take a step back, you come to realize that this is really, unfortunately, what the going cost is. And then when you add in contract, you add in the fact that it's the final year of his contract. Those were all things that had to be considered when weighing the cost of the draft pick that comes in return. So it seems, it seems low, right? But I mean, it seems realistic as well, right? Like you said at the top, it's something we kind of anticipated that if a player was moved at this time of year, this is really what the going rate is, unfortunately. So Yeah, could they have held on to him and maybe tried to make a in-season move? If he was playing, maybe they get more, but if he's on the bench, maybe they get less, right? Like it's possible that no one even picks up the phone. So the fact that you can get a 5th-round pick in return is not, it's not anything to shake a stick at. So you've got now what, two fifths, 2 6, and they're sitting there with 9 picks now in the draft. And I know Ryan has long said he doesn't expect them to make 8 picks. Well, looks like Ryan's might get his wish, or he might be the Nostradamus here. Maybe they make 9.
I can't be wrong. I can't be wrong at this point. I can't wait to retweet myself and run victory laps.
Okay, all right.
Well, there's a lot of people doing that today, unfortunately, trying to run victory laps over Okudah, which is a shame because this is a kid who is a very, very intelligent, very motivated. He gave everything he could. It's not like it was a lack of effort that landed him in the situation that he was in. It was a problematic mesh of with the scheme. The by the end of the season, it was becoming a problem. We saw them try Okudah in different spots. Look at the Dallas game when he was shifted more into like a slot role. Whenever he was asked about the coaching staff approaching him about moving to a slot or moving to a safety role, he was always, I don't want to say resistant, but his answer was always, I've never played there before, so why would I play there? You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. It's hard to tell if maybe he was resistant to the idea or maybe they just never approached him because they just didn't think it was would have been a promising move. But he's still got a chance to rebound. He's now going to be a full year plus away from his injury. Maybe he'll have a chance to find success. It's crazy when you change scheme on players. Sometimes they can find a whole new world open to them, and they can find more success. So hopefully he ends up playing well for Atlanta and giving them some promising contributions. Ideally, the Lions land a Pro Bowler with the 5th rounder, and in the end, the Lions also save a good $5+ million in cap space, and they just keep loading that cap space up and keeping us guessing on what they're going to do.
Yeah, I think it's important to address kind of the fan side of all this, because like we can look at this analytically and we can all be like, okay, they weren't going to play Okudah this year. They got a 5th-round pick for him. They unloaded what would have been a $10 million salary and dropped it to just $5 million in dead cap. Of course, all that makes sense. But this was a guy who a lot of people were really excited about when they drafted. There was definitely a lot of skepticism too. I'm not going to ignore that. Most of it seemed to be centered around value, corner at 3, which I think has since been kind of disproven that that's not a bad value pick as long as you get the right guy, which is true of any player at any position, I suppose you can say. But this is a guy who did everything right. He worked his ass off. He worked his ass off getting back from an Achilles to be ready for training camp, which in it of itself was an impressive accomplishment in that young man's career. And so to see him get traded away for a 5th it's a sad day, right? You can agree with the move. You can say they got good value for it, but it's an ultimate failure from this team. And I guess you could say from Okudah too. And no one likes to see that happen with a guy who was giving it his all. And, maybe it wasn't a scheme fit. Maybe he was just a little bit too much in his head. I mean, this is a kid who's gone through a lot for a 24-year-old, 23-year-old in his life, whatever he is. And so it's a bummer. I don't like seeing Lions trade players away in general, because you develop relationships with these people. You get to know them as people. And I don't ever want to lose the sight of that. And so people that are like running victory laps today because they were right, it's gross. Not that we need to address those type of people. We can keep the discussion here to Okudah, but I guess that's just how I'm feeling today. I don't feel great about this trade, even though I can understand it 100% made sense. The only really debatable thing about this topic is, yes, Jeff Okudah's value was about a 5th-round pick. Is that still worth making the trade for Detroit? Or is he worth having around as injury depth, as a guy who can, come in situational packages? He was getting a little taste of special teams towards the end of last year. Is it worth having someone like that on your roster, even though he's going to eat up $10 million of your cap space? Because everyone's talking about this is a team that expects to contend. So having a deep cornerback room is not a problem. That's an asset, right? So I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I know it's Ryan's turn, but I'm going to jump in here because I just want to point out the fact that if we look back at the end of the season, the writing was kind of on the wall with the depth chart, right? Now, again, this is hindsight in 2020, and we were very surprised that he found the bench in those last couple of games. Granted, he was injured, which could have played into it as well, but Jerry Jacobs was on the field and he'd been on the field. Yeah. So did Jerry Jacobs pass him on the depth chart? Probably. If he did, now that's a $10 million contract. That's fourth on your outside corner depth chart. Yeah. And then when you look at the fact that Gardner Johnson just took Will Harris's job, and Will Harris can also play on the outside. Well, now it's like, and Okudah and Will Harris battled, and Okudah won that battle. But again, when you're talking about CB4 on the outside, how big of a step down is it? And is that worth $10 million? You know what I mean? And so a lot of this, in my opinion, came down to they knew he wasn't part of the long-term plans. They thought they could maximize getting value for him. Now they could shed some cap for whatever reason, just to stay flexible. And it tells me he may not have been, from the coaching staff's perspective, he may not have been as close to the competition as we may have thought he was. And he could have been CB4, and you can't pay $10 million to CB4 on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great points. And the one left that I have to underscore that you kind of mentioned, Jeremy, is the Lions and their front office. They did right by Okudah, right? Because like you said, Eric, maybe the writing was on the wall that Okudah was destined to be CB4, especially after they made all of these moves in the offseason to upgrade their cornerback room. I mean, they're looking at a guy who was a former third overall pick who had suffered not one but two significant injuries in his first two seasons. Right, he has core surgery to repair the injury that he had going all the way back to Ohio State.
Yep.
And then he suffers the Achilles injury in year two. The guy finally, for all intents and purposes, his rookie season was last year. In my eyes, it was his first opportunity to see the field from day one, and
this is going to be his first normal offseason, right?
Yeah, not rehabbing back from an injury.
Not rehabbing, not during the COVID offseason. And I think that's why some people had a little bit of hope left in Jeff Okudah. And you even asked, the coaching staff sometimes, and Brad Holmes, they're all like, this kid is young. Last year, they said the same thing you just did, which is last year was kind of his rookie year, so there's still time for this kid to develop. And so, I mean, this is a low-risk, high-potential reward for Atlanta, for sure.
Yeah, the point being though that they did right by the player, and I think that if Okudah goes to Atlanta and he flourishes and he finds some role that suits him well, that I mean, the Lions did right by him. He's not going to harbor any ill will. He's not going to be upset. He's going to be thrilled that he got an opportunity to go showcase his talents in a place where he had an opportunity. So I think like we've kind of all, I think, agreed here that this was a win-win for both sides, that Okudah gets his opportunity, the Lions get to move on. And the last thing that I want to point out about the point that you were making earlier, Jeremy, about the way that we kind of preemptively maybe label players as busts and things like that. We have to remember that these players aren't deciding where they get picked, right? And I think that for so long, I talked about it in an article about how the Lions draft strategy is kind of changing with Brad Holmes and picking the best player available. A lot of these players that get overdrafted are being shoehorned in because they're immediate needs, right? It's not TJ Hawkinson's fault that he got drafted in the top 10. It's not, Eric Ebron's fault that he got drafted as high as he did. Jeff Okudah, the list kind of goes on and on, where it's like you said earlier, cornerback at 3, that's a pretty risky pick to make for such a volatile position like cornerback. So, again, he had a lot of pressure coming into his rookie season. And injuries really just limited him, and now he's finally getting his chance. And I look forward to him getting a chance because, like, it's not just he was a bust, right? It's not just he didn't live up to expectations as being the 3rd overall pick. Like, it's not so black and white. It's not so binary. He had good tape last year. Like,
Yeah.
Am I crazy in saying that, like, he had? I mean, national writers like Ben Salak from The Ringer is writing about how Jeffrey Okudah is finally the star that everybody thought he would be.
Right.
3 weeks into the season.
Yeah. And it felt like he just ran out of juice, right? And again, maybe
he did.
Maybe with a full offseason. Unfortunately, he's not going to have a regular offseason now because he got traded in the middle. But this is as regular of an offseason as he's going to get. And one interesting note that I think Dave Burgett pulled up was that the Falcons were Jeff Okudah's team that he wanted to play for out of college. So further doing him a favor.
I was going to ask, do you remember that story? Because I don't.
I don't either.
I don't either. Okay.
I think there will be kind of an overlooked aspect of Jeff Okudah in Detroit, and his legacy in kind of a tainted, in a weird roundabout way, is going to be left with Jerry Jacobs. Because if you're a Jerry Jacobs fan, if you think Jerry Jacobs is an awesome and important piece to this puzzle, you have Jeff Okudah to thanks for that. Because if you remember his rookie season, he's coming in as an undrafted rookie, way in and over his head, long shot to make the roster. And who does he latch on to? Jeff Okudah, who at 23, 24 years old, whatever he was at that point, acted as a mentor, something that he never got. And that's actually the reason why he did it, is like, really, Jeff's entire career, he did not have that mentor type in the locker room. And he acted as that guy in year 1 of his career, in year 2 of Jeff Okudah's career. Jeff
Okudah's only 24. He's only 24 right now.
Right. So, I mean, I think that speaks to the character of the person, which is why I think most of us that don't have this weird, I don't know, Buckeye resentment, or I want to be right about the draft resentment, hope that he succeeds in Atlanta. Before I head to break, let's talk about the Lions' future, how this impacts everything else. I see everyone now saying Devin Witherspoon at 6. I feel like the group in this room right now, we're never taking cornerback off the board. But does this increase the chances at all, or was there always a really good chance that corner was going to be a high priority?
I want to add a question and a layer to this.
Okay.
Like, we just saw Jeff Okudah's career play out in Detroit as the 3rd overall pick, and I just got done talking about how it's a bit risky to take cornerbacks that high because they are such a volatile position. Is it a shoo-in that Devin Witherspoon is the guy at 6? I don't know.
I don't know who this Devin Witherspoon guy is you're talking about, but
another Big Ten cornerback.
No, I think Witherspoon is a terrific value. I think Gonzalez is still in play. I don't think this really changes their approach because Okudah wasn't signed beyond the season anyways. And so the draft approach really, I don't think it's altered much at all. The only thing I think it leaves on the table is something that Ryan and I discussed in our last Zoom meeting together, was that could they double dip at corner? And we said no. Like, they could now, maybe, right? Because before we said if they double dip at corner, there's just not enough room. And now I think I wouldn't take it off the table. If the best player is there at the right spot and they could take another defensive back and it'd be okay. Like, they have a little bit more room. So it gives them a little bit more options, which is kind of strange to say, right? Because it doesn't change it at the top, and it gives them a little bit more freedom because you're not counting bodies. And so, but as far as like priorities, I don't think it prioritizes cornerback any more than it already was.
Yeah. I mean, and the main reason for that is I think we all saw on, looking down the line that Jeff Okudah was probably not part of this team's long-term plans, because he, like we said, like, he wasn't going to get a lot of playing time this year anyways. And if he wasn't, well, then why would they resign him next year? And so the long-term need was always there. It was pretty clear they weren't going to pick up his 5th-year option to anyone paying attention. And so we are left now with a complete changing of the guard at the cornerback position, as much as you can probably change in one offseason. So we wish Jeff Okudah the best. Obviously, we hope that the Lions have made the right moves here at the cornerback position. They made a ton of moves, and we got excited about it a couple weeks ago in free agency, and I don't think this changes much. So we are going to take a break here.